Welcome back to the Queens of the Damned Horror Podcast. This week it is just me and Miranda. Nikki is taking the week off. We miss you. We're excited for you to be back next week. It's just not the same. So this week we are starting a new series. We are doing Pick a Decade. This was Miranda's idea. I think kind of the inspiration behind it, correct me if I'm wrong, is just that we all felt like there are so many older horror movies that get ignored because it's easier and you're more familiar with, and it's easier to find. We were just talking about this. Easier to find on streaming. Newer horror movies, definitely like the 80's and newer than older horror movies. But these older movies are so influential that it's a shame that they're often overlooked and kind of left out of the discussion.
And I think there's just a lot of influences of the past that we never really talk about anymore. They're just never mentioned. To me, it just seems so important to go back and kind of look at where everything came from. Agreed.
So for our first episode, we're actually doing 2 decades because there isn't quite as much to choose from in these 2 decades. So we're going to do the 1920s and the 1930s together. And then I think in subsequent episodes, we'll just do 1 decade at a time. So the only other thing that I wanted to say was when we do get to the 1930s, anyone who's familiar with horror will notice that we are skipping the Universal horror movies. I think we plan on doing them in their own series episode. So I would hate for us to waste time talking about them now, just so we can talk about them again later.
Yeah.
So we are skipping over those, even though those were obviously kind of the biggest hits, most of the biggest hits that came out of the 30s. But there's a lot of other really good ones too. I think the first thing to say would be kind of what defined the 1920s. So you don't have the first talking motion picture until 1927. That's when The Jazz Singer comes out. That's the first full-length talkie. So I think all of them that I can think of. And so they have to rely 100% on atmosphere because that's all they have. They only have atmosphere. They only have what you can see. You can't hear anything. Obviously there's no real dialogue. There's no music. Nothing. It's just silent.
Mine had music added in after.
Well, and I think a lot of the time, someone who's more familiar with older movies can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you would have a live orchestra in the theater sometimes that would play music along with the movie.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I think that was the big thing with The Jazz Singer, is not only were they speaking, but there was a score that was recorded, and The Jazz Singer is a musical, so they sang on screen. I mean, it was kind of this huge technical marvel. So, I think people skip silent movies a lot because they do require you to pay attention the whole time.
Yeah.
You cannot look at your phone because then you'll miss the dialogue card.
Yep.
And you don't know. And I've certainly been guilty of that. I've looked down and been like, oh God, rewind it. Rewind it.
Yep, I learned that the hard way.
So these movies rely 100% on atmosphere, which I personally like in a horror movie. I would rather have a lot of atmosphere than a lot of jump scares. Obviously, there were no jump scares in the 20s because there was no sound.
Yeah.
And so there was no, silence and then, oh, the music gets really loud or anything like that.
Well, I found that in silent horror films, to me, they're a million times creepier. I don't know what it is about it.
They are.
But, oh my God, I watched my movie, right before I went to bed, and I think it was such a bad idea, because I was so freaked out.
That's so funny. Yeah, they definitely are creepy. So the first big horror movie of the 20s, and really I think probably the first big famous horror movie ever, if there's an earlier one, someone correct me, but I've never heard of it, is going to be Nosferatu, which came out in 1922. Nosferatu is a expressionist horror movie. Expressionism is basically just a style of filmmaking and a style of storytelling. So it was directed by F.W. Murnau. I believe is how you pronounce it. It is a German movie. But again, it's silent, so it doesn't really matter.
Our films have more in common than I thought they did.
Yeah! And this movie is actually, it was an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula. They change all of the names. Mm-hmm. So Count Dracula is Count Orlok, and Nosferatu is actually their word for vampire. I think a lot of people who haven't seen it think that Nosferatu is the name of the main character. Mm-hmm. But that's actually the German word for vampire, I assume. It follows the same plot line as Dracula. You have the fiancé who goes to Transylvania to, do a business deal, and then, of course, ends up getting killed by Count Orlok, etc., who then, of course, comes to Germany, I believe, in the movie. Or, yeah, he does. He goes to Germany rather than England in this movie, because, of course, it's a German movie. Mm-hmm. There's all these mysterious deaths, and, it follows the plot of Dracula. He becomes obsessed with Ellen, who is supposed to be Mina, who actually, at the end of Nosferatu, I guess spoiler, but this movie's been out for, 80 years, so, 90 years. Yeah. 95 years, too late, guys. Yeah. She dies at the end. So the way that they kill him at the end is she basically goes and sacrifices herself to him so that he will die, and he becomes so, engrossed in drinking her blood that he loses track of time, and the sun comes up, and he turns into a puff of smoke. And she lives just long enough to see her husband and then dies. So this movie was filmed for basically no money. This movie did have a score, which was performed by a live orchestra when you would go see the movie. Unfortunately, most of the original score has been lost. One thing with silent movies, and just older movies in general, is they obviously had no concept of home video or the idea that you would be able to see these at any other time. So there was not as much care taken and preservation, unfortunately, just because, again, they had no concept of it. They didn't understand. Who would ever have seen a VHS tape coming, right? Yeah. Or even TV. It's too much. Mm-hmm. There have been multiple scores written by famous composers to be played when you watch Nosferatu. The producers and the director of this movie were sued by Bram Stoker's heirs because, of course, Dracula was copyrighted at the time, and they did not have permission to make this movie. After they sued, the relatives actually won, and a judge ordered all copies of the film destroyed.
Oh, wow.
But luckily, somebody, and I can't find who right now, but somebody saved one, and now it, of course, has become this hugely influential, famous horror movie. Mm-hmm. It is, for anyone who's not seen it, we were mentioning this before we started, it is in the public domain in the US, so it is on YouTube. It's only an hour and 15 minutes long. Doesn't take that long to watch. And it's I think it's very effective. Just the way, again, there's no sound. So the way that they have to use the light and shadows and storytelling to get the point across, I think is just really, it's just something that you don't see anymore.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. So Nosferatu is probably the first big horror movie ever. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much of a hit it was when it came out. I think it was a pretty big hit. And then, of course, over time, it has a huge following, I guess I could say.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who has seen it and not liked it. And, of course, there is a remake of it that's also actually very good that was released in the 70s. So I also recommend the remake, even though it's from another decade. The remake is pretty great.
They actually got one right. Yay.
They did. Well, it's Werner Herzog who makes really great movies, so
that's awesome.
Yeah, that remake was great.
Yeah.
So Nosferatu is our first recommendation for a movie from the 20s.
Yeah, and it has had so much influence. I mean, the movie that I picked from the 30s, I'm not going to mention it now, but it's kind of, I kind of think of it as I would Nosferatu. Like, Nosferatu is kind of like film baseline for vampires, you know, and those movies are just huge. They're such a big deal. I mean, without them, I mean, we might not have Twilight, but we certainly wouldn't have stuff like, you know, 30 Days of Night and all of the great vampire movies that are out there.
Yeah, and you can definitely see the influence of this movie, like you said, in other vampire movies and stories. Yeah. I mean, even though this was technically based on Dracula, they used so many of their own ideas in terms of setting the scene and the characters and that kind of thing that it really becomes its own influence apart from Dracula.
Yeah. Well, and I think of Salem's Lot all the time when I think of Nosferatu, because I swear that vampire looks exactly like the vampire in Nosferatu.
He does, and I don't know that was done on purpose, but I have to think that it was.
I can't remember what the main vampire's name is right now from...
Neither can I. I haven't read that book in a real long time.
I haven't finished it. I started it a while ago, and then I don't know what happened. I just stopped reading it, and I haven't finished it since then. I really need to. But I love the movie. The movie is so creepy.
The miniseries, yeah.
Oh my gosh. That scene.
So good.
That scene with the little boy floating at the window, that gives me chills every time. Oh, gosh.
Me too.
Man.
Barlow. Was that his name? Barlow? Okay.
Yeah.
That was it.
Except he's blue.
Yes, he is blue.
I watched The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which actually came out...
A classic.
Yeah, which actually came out in 1920, so just before... Oh,
yeah. You beat me!
Just before Nosferatu. But it is also a German movie, and it's also an expressionist film. Very much so an expressionist film. It is... When I was watching it the whole time, all I could think is, like, either... the set design is awful, or this is supposed to be really, really artsy. Because a lot of the set had, like, just art. Like, you'd have walls that were, like, covered in things that you wouldn't see on a normal wall. Or there was a doorway that was, okay, the wall was, like, tilted, and then the doorway was a triangle. You know, so after I found out that it was an expressionist film, I was like, okay, I get it. Now it makes sense. But at first I was really confused. I was like, what is going on here? So The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a silent film, but it does have the musical score to it, which is very well done. I loved the music that they put to it. It's in 6 acts, which I thought was really interesting. Is that normal for a silent film to be split into acts?
Yes. Oh. A lot of movies, I believe, would have at least an intermission.
Okay.
You would get up and get snacks or whatever they did. I don't really know. Most of my knowledge of silent movies is based on, like, Singing in the Rain. Oh. So it's not like I'm not like an expert here, but yes, I do think they would be broken up into acts. I guess my other knowledge is the movie The Artist. I don't know if you saw that a few years ago.
No.
But that was broken up into acts, so we'll just go with yes.
Yeah, but this one has 6, and I, again, think that they're split very well. It's kind of almost like reading a book and just having chapters, because it's just different sections of the movie. So it was directed by Robert Wein. He's German, so it doesn't look anything like the way I pronounced it, but we're going to go with it. And Herman Worm, a expressionist art director, designed the production. And basically, the whole story you find out at the end, again, spoiler alert, but like Rachel said, you had like 90 plus years.
Too late.
In the end, we find out that it's a story told by a psychiatric patient. Caligari arrives in a town and he exercises hypnotism over a somnambulist, Caesar. Basically, he's a man who has been asleep for like over 20 years, I think he says. And he hypnotizes him into killing people. But he uses him as a, like, sideshow sort of a thing. He has him in a coffin and he wakes him up. And they claim he can tell the future and the past. And of course, the first thing somebody asks is, when will I die? And Caesar says, tomorrow. And Caesar kills him the next day. So Caesar is committing murders throughout this town. Of course, we don't know it right away. We only find out sort of in the end what's going on. But he's committing murders throughout the town. And our main character finds out later on that Caligari is the director of a psychiatric ward after he follows him in. And he gets into his office and he's reading a diary and he learns that Caligari is actually imitating a man called Dr. Caligari that hypnotized a somnambulist to kill. So it's some guy from history that this man who came to town is trying to imitate. We then learned that our main character is a patient at the psychiatric ward because he tries to tell everybody about what happened, and we see them grab Dr. Caligari and pull him into a room and they put him in a straitjacket. But the next scene is our main character in the psychiatric ward, and he starts freaking out and he's like, no, you think it's me, you think I'm the one that's crazy, and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of left in the open whether or not, like, did they put him into the psychiatric ward because of the things he was saying, or was he already in the psychiatric ward? A lot of the stuff that I read about it, most people believe that he was already in the psychiatric ward, and this is just a story that he made up. So science was huge around this time, especially psychology. Jung was huge around this time. And so what I got from this movie, a lot of it is kind of a lot of commentary on mental illness and really not good commentary. Basically, the mentally ill cannot be trusted and are dangerous individuals and have troublesome ideals. There isn't really anything positive about the mentally ill that comes out of this film. So it, to me, really kind of exemplifies a society that was learning more and more about the mind and becoming more and more terrified of the things that the mind can do. And a lot of silent films around this time, I guess, dealt with social problems outwardly, which, like I said, this film definitely does, because it's right there out in the open. Like, mentally ill people are dangerous people. And the writers definitely were not afraid of just throwing that out there. But it also kind of outlines a fear of authority as well. Germany was dealing with a lot of political extremism at the time, and they were dealing with the effects of World War I. So the film was originally meant to comment on authority, the hypnotism of individuals who can't fight for themselves to kill or be killed, but it kind of ended up becoming a story about how authority is kind of the savior in this situation, because the authority is taking care of the mentally ill person and taking them out of society. And so it was kind of at the time thought of as troublesome in that society, especially with, later on Hitler rising. And so it at first was taken well, and then after a while people started kind of thinking about the message that it sent and maybe thinking it didn't send the right messages. That is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It is a creepy ass movie. Okay.
It is.
And when I was at a community college doing my gen eds, I took a film class, and we spent a section on silent films. And one of the things that I remembered they could do with silent films is they could add color later to it.
I believe they would hand paint it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. But it would wash basically the whole scene. And that's something they really utilized in this film extremely well. Because when you have a memory coming up, it's like this old, like, yellowy color. They utilize those colors so much. There are moments where it's blue or it's red. I don't know. The movie was just phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. But like I said, it was creepy. Don't watch it before you're about to go to sleep. I really would not recommend it.
It is creepy. And again, I mean, they have to rely 100% on atmosphere. I mean, there's nothing else.
Yeah.
Just the way it looks and the way it makes you feel.
Yeah.
That's all that you get.
Well, and there were moments where the main character was walking downstairs and the music literally lined up with the steps. It was the coolest thing. Like, there was a beat every time he took a step. It was really cool. They really did a great job with it.
I've seen it, and it had the score, and I wonder if that's the original score from when the movie was issued, or if it's like Nosferatu, where the original score has been lost, unfortunately, and so it's just, people write music for it.
I don't remember. Now I'm gonna look.
Because now I'm curious, because I think that's so interesting that you could have composers interpret the music a different way, right?
Yeah.
Come up with different ways to score the same movie, which you obviously don't get nowadays. I mean, now you have the score that's written specifically for the movie, and that's it.
Well, it says at the beginning of this, I watched it on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. The following print of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari with the original color, tinting, and toning was reconstructed by something of Germany. So I don't know if that means that they just put it together as a film, or if, I don't know.
Interesting. Well, if anybody knows, tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, it's on YouTube. I know it's also on Amazon Prime, and I think it's on Shudder.
It's not on Shudder.
Okay, it used to be on Netflix. It might still be there.
Yeah. Well, there is I believe there's a remake of it. I think that's the one that's more readily available.
There's a remake?
I do believe so.
That's sad.
They remake everything.
Why? I mean,
2005.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That sounds horrific.
I'm imagining that movie.
I can't even picture it. Oh my God. Just boobs everywhere.
Yeah.
I can't even picture it. I don't even want to. I'm just going to go back to my life before I knew that existed.
Oh my God. I'm so curious.
I was about to say, I do almost want to watch it though.
Yeah, it's probably not good at all, though. I don't even recognize any of these names.
I was about to say, considering it came out a little over 10 years ago, and you and I both have no memory of it, does not bode well.
Yeah.
I knew Nosferatu had been remade before. I think I probably saw the remake first. But the fact that this one, no one even knows about it, I'd say it's a hard pass.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm trying to picture it in a 2000s horror movie. I really can't. Why?
We'll just have to find it and watch it now, because now I want to know.
It's on Amazon Video. You can watch it for $3.99.
Well, I'm not paying for it. I'll find it somewhere for free.
Yeah, I'm going to try to look it up now. That's so funny.
That's so funny. Yeah, so the last movie from the 20s that I wanted to talk about is Phantom of the Opera. This was made with Lon Chaney, who of course is one of the first big movie stars and one of the first big horror stars. His son, obviously Lon Chaney Jr., would go on to do The Wolfman and quite a few other horror movies. So again, this is a pretty straight adaptation of Phantom of the Opera, the novel, obviously not the musical. The musical wasn't going to be written for another 60 years, but this movie came out in 1925. It is silent, again, and this movie is most famous for Lon Chaney's makeup. So he did The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1923, and he was allowed to design his own makeup for that movie. And because it was such a hit and his makeup was so well regarded, they allowed him to do it again for Phantom of the Opera. And the makeup is, it's pretty amazing. Especially considering what they had to work with at the time. Apparently to contemporary audiences, it was so horrifying. People screamed, they fainted, they left the theater during the scene where Christine unmasks him. Yeah, and it is really impressive makeup. We'll put a picture of it up on the blog so everyone can see it, but it's really impressive. And this is one of the only movies where this is what he looks like in the book. In the book, he is described as basically having a skull for a face and then just thinning hair on top. And so he really did try and keep it true to the book.
Well, he hit the nail on the head,
Yeah, it's creepy, right?
It is. It's really creepy. And really, you can't, if you have what you said, a skull head? What'd you say? How'd you just?
Yeah, so in the book he's described as, it's a skull-like face, so it's almost like it's a skull with just really thin skin kind of pulled over it.
Yeah, and there's only so much you can do with that before it gets corny. I think he nailed it.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And this ended up, after Hunchback of Notre Dame and after this, that kind of became his trademark, was designing his own makeup for movies. So clearly an extremely talented man. So this movie, it's so funny that you brought up that they would sometimes colorize these silent movies. So in 1930, they decided to reissue this movie with sound and with color. They actually only ended up doing half the movie, partly because Lon Chaney, the studio was not aware of this, but he had throat cancer, which actually ended up killing him. Yeah. Record his voice, his dialogue. Some of the other people did. They actually had to advertise when they reissued this movie that Lon Chaney was silent. This movie's actually really, really well preserved.
Crazy.
There are even bonus scenes
about him for the most part.
that they filmed scenes that were cut from the movie that somebody saved, which is extremely rare with older movies. Again, I mean, if it ended up on the cutting room floor, there was no idea that, anyone would ever want these scenes, so they would just throw them away. Kind of the big launching pad, I guess, for commercial horror films. And it's really good.
I was going to say, it could be good or it could be bad.
It is good, I think, because at least at this time, I mean, this movie is a commercial movie. The Universal horror movies are commercial movies, but they're also, I think, artistically successful. They would make a movie with a certain movie star for cheap, just because they knew that people would pay to see the new, Clark Gable movie or Cary Grant movie or whatever. They knew that people would pay to see the star, even if the movie was subpar, right? So it's I mean, Hollywood's always been a movie or a money-making venture. I mean, always. My first movie from the 1930s that is really a classic and really influential is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That came out in 1931. So this movie did win an Oscar for Frederick March, who played Jekyll and Hyde.
Amazing.
For a horror movie, I know.
It's incredible.
Probably the only one. But this movie, so this is a pre-code movie. I don't know how much people know about the Hollywood Code. So the Hollywood Code was something that was established by the studios. It was basically like a censorship thing. There were all kinds of rules. You couldn't have sex on screen, obviously. If you were a quote-unquote, bad guy in the movie, you had to be punished at the end.
Oh, okay.
You couldn't get away with it.
Oh my god.
So it was basically just rules for how to make movies. But when you see these pre-code movies, like Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, and Mr. Hyde, it's really interesting because they're kind of risque. I mean, you think about these movies from the 30s and you think, oh, it's so prudish and, all buttoned up and stuff. But, I mean, one of the characters she's a bar singer, but, clearly she's, a hooker. It's interesting because you have these movies like this where it was released in 1931 pre-code. And then back in the 30s, 40s, they would re-release movies every few years into the theater because that's the only way you could see it again. So it's re-released after the code, and they actually made them cut footage.
Oh, geez.
So that it could meet the code. But again, somebody saved it for some reason. And when you buy the DVD version, it has the full version. So one of the things that you really start to get into with the 30s is special effects. And the idea that you could do something cool on screen and kind of, be creative with it. So the big special effect in this movie is the transformation scene. There's like 2 or 3 of them in the movie. He transforms from Jekyll into Hyde on screen.
Wow.
So basically what they did is, I'm going to spoil it for everybody.
Oh, no.
But for decades, I mean, decades after this movie came out, nobody knew how they had done it. Because no one would tell. So eventually the director did explain how they did it. So, and this is so creative, which is why I want to talk about it. Because it's, again, like, they don't have the resources that we have now. So they had to be creative.
Yeah.
They would put, you know, just like his regular stage makeup on and film him. And then they would put makeup on in a contrasting color. And then they would put a filter over the lens in the same color and film him. And then they'd put another layer on in another color.
Interesting.
And so it looks like his face is changing colors on screen. Like the, you know, gets dark circles around his eyes and his cheekbones become really hollowed out. It's really, and the transformation scene is on YouTube. This movie is not on YouTube because it's still copyrighted, but the transformation scene is on YouTube, and it's still cool to watch.
Yeah.
And what was so interesting about it is because this movie, of course, is black and white, you can't see how the filters, you know, you can't see the colors. So you can't tell that there's a filter being applied that's either making makeup invisible or visible.
Yeah. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. And again, it's just so creative. I mean, who would even think about trying something like that now?
Yeah, everybody just uses CGI these days. Right.
Or even if you have someone like Guillermo del Toro, who I know does do a lot of like practical makeup. I mean, it's still just prosthetics. With, not that it's not impressive, because it's incredibly impressive prosthetics that movies use. I mean, it's always amazing. But this is, I think, just so above and beyond. But again, they had no other choice. They knew they wanted to do something cool. No one had ever done it before. So they just had to make it up.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible what people can do with practical effects.
It really is. And it holds up. Yeah. That's the thing. It's still neat to watch it.
Right.
I mean, yes, it looks slightly cheesy because it's from the 30s, but it's still cool to see the scene and just be amazed that they could do something like that.
Right.
This movie, that's probably what it's most famous for, is kind of starting the trend, I guess, of really using these creative special effects in movies. Highly recommended. Watch this movie. Guys, watch all these movies.
Yeah. All right. So I picked White Zombie, which came out in 1932. It was directed by Victor Halperin. And it, of course, stars Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
Probably the most famous horror actor probably ever, because everybody knows Bela Lugosi, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
And it is considered the first feature-length zombie film. So it is about this young couple named Madeline and Neil. They arrive at the home of Mr. Beauchamp, in Haiti, and they're going to get married. But Beauchamp is in love with Madeline and approaches a witch doctor, who is Murder Legendre, played by Bela Lugosi, to lure her away from her fiancé. And instead, this witch doctor turns her into a zombie. This is basically a love story, but with zombies. So Neil arrives with a priest and he saves Madeline by killing the witch doctor. Yeah, it's pretty much a love story. The zombies, there's no practical effects. There's no prosthetics. I don't even think they put makeup on them. They were just people who have blank faces and didn't say anything. They're basically just slaves to Bela Lugosi. But while Madeline is a zombie, she still has an attachment to Neil, which is entirely impossible, and they talk about it a lot in the film, that it's not possible for her to have any memories in general, but for them to be affecting her the way they are, it's just, it can't be happening. So she resists the witch doctor's command to kill Neil at one point. And unfortunately, Madeline is definitely a damsel in distress. She is at the mercy of 3 men who have complete and total control over her. She's kind of just like a toy bouncing back and forth between this men. Like, I want her. No, I want her. Like, everybody wants her. Nobody cares what she wants.
No.
Yeah. And the tagline of this movie is literally, with his zombie grip, he made her perform every desire. Which, spoiler alert, she performed no desires. It is no, like it's not even accurate. He doesn't really make her do anything except he tries to get her to kill her fiance, and she doesn't do it. So the tagline is just terrible, but it outlines basically that she was at the mercy of 3 guys this whole film. Bela Lugosi is amazing in this movie. He was the best part of the film. He utilizes this, like, incredibly creepy stare that he can do, and he has long fingers. Have you seen his fingers?
They are long.
Oh my god. Like, he really uses them in this movie. It's creepy. And the best part is that he has horns on his eyebrows, which is just amazing. Have you seen that?
I have seen this movie.
Oh my god. I love the eyebrows. Like, I think, on the movie poster, it's a picture of
his eyebrows.
His eyes and his eyebrows, which, like, you see all of his emotion right there. Like, that's, I think, the creepiest part about Bela Lugosi is right there, in his eyes and his eyebrows.
Oh, yeah.
This film was actually filmed in 11 days, and the budget was so small that they had to shoot at night.
I mean, you can tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it wasn't critically received well when it was originally released, but modern audiences enjoy and praise the film. And I would say mostly because, one, Bela Lugosi, and also because it's, like, the first zombie film. But again,
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot of fun. It's pretty corny at times, but it's, I don't know. You can look past it. I feel like it's something that you can look past. It is a fun movie.
You can. I would say it's not racially sensitive, clearly.
Yeah.
Considering Bela Lugosi is playing a Haitian voodoo witch doctor, that kind of tells you all you need to know about the racial politics of this movie, but I can accept it because it was the 30s.
Right.
And I will just give them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't know any better.
They also probably just wanted to put Bela Lugosi in it.
I think this was... I'm trying to think. I feel like this was pre-Dracula.
I think it was just after Dracula.
Oh, it was. It was just after Dracula.
Yeah.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, I think the idea of having a movie with a black lead would have been just... I can't think of one from that time period that would have had a black lead. I mean, none that I can think of.
Yeah.
So it just was something that wouldn't even have crossed their mind.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. The box office for this film was really good for an independent film. It actually did very well for itself as an independent movie. And this is a not so fun fact. It is one of the few American horror films that was approved by Nazis. So...
Hey!
I don't really know what to think about.
Why?
I don't know. They did not explain that.
I feel like there has to be, like, some kind of really interesting story there. Like, what about this movie was, like, approved by Nazis?
I don't know. Like, I kind of sat and I thought about it. I don't get it. I don't know what about it would scream, yes, Nazis love this. I have no idea. But there you go. That's an interesting fact for the day.
I don't know if you know this.
Oh no.
Do you know this?
Probably not.
Do you know who got their name from this movie? I'm shocked that you don't know.
You're talking about the band White Zombie, right?
Yeah.
That was my next fact. No, it
wasn't. Fact. That's the only thing I know about this movie.
Rob Zombie titled his band after the film, and then this is a quote from him. It's a great film that not a lot of people know about. It amazes me that a film that is so readily available can be so lost.
That's hysterical. That's like the only fun fact I know about this movie.
I love Rob Zombie.
I know. I was like, wait, Miranda likes Rob Zombie.
Yeah.
That's all I know about this. Well, I've seen this movie a long time ago, but literally the only fact I know about that is the band, and that this is part of Ed Wood. I think they talk about it in Ed Wood.
Okay. Well, that's all I have to say about White Zombie, but it's kind of a big deal because we wouldn't have zombies really without it. I mean, it's considered the first feature length, but again, like George Romero is considered the father of zombies.
Well, and zombies really, because there's another movie which we'll talk about when we do our episode on the 40s, but it's called I Walked with a Zombie. Mm-hmm. And zombies originally were not the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
They were under a voodoo spell.
Yeah.
So it's just a different concept of zombies.
Right. But this kind of, I don't know, I think of it as like, you know, it got the ball rolling, and then
it did.
Romero gave us the zombie we have today, which
I
just want to go ahead.
Yeah. No, just like the raising from the dead type zombie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, our last horror movie that we're going to be talking about today is King Kong. So, I consider King Kong horror. Mm-hmm. Some people probably consider it science fiction or an action movie or whatever.
There's a fine line between science fiction and horror. It moves depending on who you talk to. So, if anybody has a problem with it, then you can just fast forward.
And I will say that I was reading that on Rotten Tomatoes, it's been ranked as the greatest horror film of all time.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So there you go. So I assume everyone knows the plot of King Kong. If you don't, I'll just kind of run through it. So a filmmaker, he makes like wildlife films. So he charters this ship and he is trying to find an actress to star in his new movie, and he meets Ann Darrow, who's played by Fay Wray, and he convinces her to join him, and they sail out to this mysterious island, Skull Island. When they get there, they hear about this local legend of this monster, and all they know about it is that its name is Kong. So they land on the island, and they start filming, and they see a group of natives. Again, this movie was made in the 30s. Mm-hmm. It is pretty racially insensitive.
Yeah.
I mean, the natives are black, obviously, and I mean the full bones through the nose, like grass skirts. Clearly not a sensitive or accurate portrayal of, I think, most. I mean, I assume this is supposed to take place off the coast of Africa. They never mention it. Mm-hmm. But probably not what tribes in any country in Africa were historically like. But this was the stereotype at the time, so this is what they went with. So, in any case, they see the natives preparing to sacrifice a woman, you can assume it's like a virgin, as the bride of Kong. So the chief of the native tribe stops the ceremony, and he offers to trade 6 women for Anne. Mm-hmm. And of course they refuse and they leave. Well, that night, the natives come and they kidnap Anne and tie her to an altar and offer her to Kong, who of course is King Kong, which is a giant ape. He carries her off into the jungle and he saves her. There's a lot of other like prehistoric creatures on the island. He saves her. And she starts to kind of be attached to him. You know, she realizes, you know, he's an animal. He doesn't know. He's not a bad creature. He's not evil. Mm-hmm. And so the film crew ends up kidnapping him. They bring him back to New York. They build a stage show around him, and he ends up escaping, and he takes Anne and, of course, climbs to the top of the Empire State Building, and he sets her down, you know, trying to protect her, and he ends up being killed and dies, and it's extremely sad. Yeah, yeah. I always cry at the end of King Kong. Yeah. Always, because he doesn't know, and he was, you know, ripped away from his home, and it's very sad.
Yeah, it is. It's very telling of our world, I think. I mean, it may have come out in the 30s, but God, it's still relevant today.
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah.
Like you said, it really, I think, has a good social commentary of how we go into these cultures and places that we don't understand. And we are like, well, let's bring it back to America.
Yeah. And make money off of it.
Right. And guess what? It doesn't really work out.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is extremely, extremely ahead of its time in terms of the special effects. So this was the first movie to use stop animation, rear projection, miniatures, all that kind of thing. So people were terrified of this movie when they saw it in the theater. People ran from this movie screaming. People fainted. People vomited in the theater. They didn't understand that it wasn't real.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
I mean, of course you watch it now. Does the monkey look real? God, no. It's so clearly claymation. But at the time, no one had ever seen anything like this movie.
Yeah.
And people did not understand. People thought that Fay Wray was really in danger.
My goodness.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
crazy.
people did not understand that this was not she was not acting with a real ape.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at one point, like I said, there were other prehistoric creatures on the island. So you have two stop motion characters. You have King Kong and then there's a T-Rex.
Mm-hmm.
And they fight each other. And it took them 7 weeks to film that scene.
Wow.
Just that scene. Because, of course, with stop motion, you move it a centimeter.
Right.
And then you film it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move it another centimeter. And then you film it.
Yeah.
So the man who did the stop motion for this movie is named Willis O'Brien. And one of the people that he had with him was his protege, who is Ray Harryhausen. So Ray Harryhausen ends up becoming the most famous stop motion animator in Hollywood. Ray Harryhausen movies, you can buy a box set of his movies with his stop motion effects. I don't know if you've ever seen Jason and the Argonauts.
Oh my God. I feel like I have.
So there's a scene in that where there's a battle with skeletons that's all stop motion, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
One of the other things that this movie did that was the first time anyone had done this is they had to take the animated stop motion footage and they had to combine it with the separately filmed live footage and make it seem believable. Because, of course, the stop motion King Kong was not 10 feet tall. He was just a little figurine, just a little miniature. So you had to make it look like he was really interacting with Fay Wray. And again, this was so convincing to people at the time that they did not understand that this is real. Or this was not real. It's the same with the scene at the end where King Kong is on the Empire State Building and there is live footage of planes, quote unquote, attacking him. And they had to take those two scenes and make it look like those planes were really hitting this monkey. And it's impressive, even now watching it, just to see, again, what they could do with nothing but just their creativity. I mean, they couldn't rely on computers.
Right.
They couldn't rely on, someone's done this before, how did they do it?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, this movie ended up winning, I think, quite a few of the, special achievement Oscars that they give to, the technical people that develop new concepts and new techniques. But I know that Fay Wray, in the scene where King Kong fights a T-Rex, she spent 22 hours sitting in a fake tree, acting like she was seeing this battle.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Awful.
And yes. And what they did is they basically had a translucent screen where the battle would be taking place. They projected footage that they had filmed of the stop motion animation onto the screen. And then they filmed her watching the footage and then edited it together somehow. Wow. It's just, I can't even understand it.
Yeah.
And it's been like 60 years.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So again, this movie has been remade twice. The first one from the 70s is pretty horrible. The Peter Jackson one I actually don't hate. Mostly because Andy Serkis does such a great job as King Kong.
I'm trying to remember which one that is.
Naomi Watts plays the Fay Wray character. Jack Black's in it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so the one from the 70s is the one with Jessica Lange plays Fay Wray's character.
Okay. I don't mind that one. Yeah, they just remade it again.
Well, they just did Kong Skull Island, which is like a prequel to it.
Oh, okay.
Which then they are going to tie into Godzilla vs. King Kong, which God knows, even if it's terrible, I'll see it like 17 times.
Yeah, same here. I'm excited.
I love Godzilla.
Yeah. Oh my god, I used to watch the stop motion animation ones when I was a kid with the bad...
Oh, the Japanese ones.
Yeah, where they would dub it over with English. Yeah. I used to watch
I don't know if we ever talked about how we got into horror. I can't remember if we talked about that in the first episode or not. But that was how I got into horror. I was 2 years old and my dad brought King Kong home. And my mom got really mad at him because she said Rachel's going to be terrified. And I thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
There was a scene where King Kong steps on this guy. And because it's dubbed, 30 seconds later, he screams after he's already been stepped on.
Or were you talking about Godzilla?
Yeah, Godzilla. Okay. Godzilla. I'm sorry. Godzilla. And I would just laugh and laugh and laugh. Yeah. And go, again, yeah. And they'd have to rewind it.
They were so fun. They were fun.
Yeah. They were fun. But yes, so there was a theory for a long time that this movie was about the dangers of interracial romance. Because, of course, historically, Black people have been visually portrayed as ape-like. That is a common racist insult against Black people, is calling them monkeys, etc. The filmmakers have said, or said at the time, I guess, that it was not supposed to be an allegory for interracial romance. They just had racist natives. But that King Kong wasn't supposed to be representing a Black person.
Yeah.
He was just supposed to be a monkey.
Yeah.
In the 20s and 30s, I mean, again, you really start to see these advances in storytelling, in special effects, in makeup, which lays the foundation for all future horror movies. I mean, horror movies would not be what they were today if we didn't have movies like King Kong and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu.
Yeah.
So it's interesting watching them and watching kind of the origins of horror.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and everything, you see everything start to connect after a while, the more you watch them.
Mm-hmm. You do. And you can really start to see the influences in later horror movies. So, so I think I might have mentioned at the beginning, but these are hard to find sometimes for streaming, but they're definitely worth seeking out.
Yep.
I think it would be fun to maybe make a blog post of, because there are quite a few great movies from the 30s, the 20s and 30s that we did not talk about.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be a lot of fun to make a blog post of, here are some other recommended movies. If you're interested in seeing movies from this time period, here are some other winners, because there are a lot that are that we skipped that are just amazing.
You can find Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and White Zombie, and you said Nosferatu. They're all on YouTube.
I know Jekyll and Hyde is not on there. I know King Kong is not on there, because I'm pretty sure King Kong is still copyrighted, but Phantom of the Opera might be on there as well. It is. Phantom of the Opera is also on there.
Okay. We'll link those as well, so people have the opportunity to watch them.
We will. And we'll go ahead and, since Jekyll and Hyde is not on there in full, but the transformation scene is, we'll go ahead and link that too, because that's really the most famous part of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be awesome.
But yeah, thank you for taking this journey through the 20s and 30s with us. I love old horror movies. I was telling Miranda and Nikki that, my dad, I mean, he loved these movies when he was a kid, and they would reissue them in theaters, like I said, and he and his friends would go see them. So I grew up watching these movies. So it's just fun to like talk about them and introduce other people to them because again, because they're harder to find, I think a lot of people ignore them.
Yeah.
Which is too bad.
Yeah.
Because you're missing out.
Well, I have to say, I hadn't really seen any 20 or 30s horror, except for, like, the Universal monster movies, because my dad doesn't like old movies. He does not like old movies. So I never watched older movies. Like, even the movies from the 80s, like, I watched because my mom wanted to watch them. We had to watch them without my dad there. So watching these was, I mean, just eye-opening. It was awesome. And I'm totally gonna watch way more of the 20s and 30s horror because really it's fantastic.
They're so good. They're so good. And they're definitely worth seeking out. And it's just a lot of fun to see where it all started. I mean, you know, just the origins of the genre and kind of how it's changed, but also how it's still, a lot of parts of it are still the same. I mean, again, you still do have these money grabs, which they had in the 30s. I mean, not so much the 20s for horror, but definitely in the 30s. But how you did have the artistic horror movies, which I think you have now. And have always had.
So, I guess, reminder to everybody listening that our next episode is coming out in not next week, but the week after. We are going back to bi-weekly episodes. This is our last weekly episode. Sad face. Nikki and I are back in school, and Rachel's about to have a baby, so... we can't do this anymore.
Life's happening. Life's happening all of a sudden. So I'm excited for our next episode. Again, we're not going to announce the topic. If you'd like to know the topic beforehand, just a reminder, we do have our Patreon that's up. Patreon.com/Queens of the Damned, right?
It's QOTD
podcast. I can never remember.
Everything's different. All of our links are different. It's impossible to keep them straight.
They're all different. I know. But we do appreciate our donors that we already have. Thank you again to both of you. It's so nice. Of 2 people we don't even know. It's so nice. Thank you again. So until next time then.
Yeah, and we will be back with Nikki.
Yes, Nikki will be back for the next episode. In theory, if the baby doesn't decide to come early, we will all be here for at least a couple more episodes. So
we'll cross our fingers. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Oh my God, please don't. Please don't come early.